The watch industry has a dirty secret, and most people keep falling for it. The industry has tricked people into thinking that more expensive is better. But these 8 watches most people walk straight past say something entirely, and let me tell you about them. Number 8. Casio A158WA. Here's something that should not exist at its price point. A stainless steel bracelet, a chrome-plated resin case, an LED backlight, and a stopwatch, all on a watch you can buy for less than a cheap lunch. The A158WA sits right next to the F91W on the shelf, and most people grab the plastic one. That's a mistake. The steel bracelet on this watch looks like something Casio charges significantly more for on their higher-end vintage line. The proportions are tight at 33 millimeters across, but that's the point. It doesn't try to look expensive. It looks right. There's a thickness to the bracelet links that doesn't feel cheap in the hand. Pick one up. It has a weight-to-price ratio that should not be physically possible in a $15 object. Casio launched this watch in 1989, and they have not needed to change it since, which says something about how well the design was resolved the first time. The reason watch collectors have a soft spot for this one is specific. In 2020 and 2021, during the pandemic, a certain type of person started buying small steel digital watches because they were bored, a little nostalgic, and suddenly cost-conscious. The A158WA sold out repeatedly on Amazon US. Not because of a trend piece, not because an influencer wore one, because word moved through collector forums that this was the best-looking piece of value engineering Casio had produced in 30 years. A Watch You Seek thread from late 2021 called it the most underrated watch under $20. Full stop. That thread ran to 42 pages. Think about that. 42 pages of forum discussion about a $15 watch, from people who own Submariners and Speedmasters and Grand Seikos. That's not nostalgia. That's a considered assessment of what the object is and what it does that comparable objects don't. There's a 19-year-old who bought one of these on a whim in 2021 because it was cheap and she liked how it looked. She works in architecture now. She has $200 to spend on a watch if she wants to. She still wears the A158, not because she hasn't gotten around to upgrading, because when she looked at what $200 would buy, none of it was more her than this. The collector term for a watch like this is honest. It doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. It has a steel bracelet because it can, and it costs $15 because the people who made it decided that's what it should cost. And the gap between those two facts is where the value lives. Most watches are priced for aspiration. This one is priced for what it is. Honestly, I keep coming back to this one. There's something about a watch with a steel bracelet at this price that makes you question whether the price-to-quality relationship in this industry is working the way we've been told it does. That's a useful thing to sit with before you spend more on anything. If a $15 watch with a steel bracelet bothers you, the next one is going to bother you more. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. Number 7, Casio F91W. Most people reading this have seen this watch their whole lives. Most people don't know the full story. The F91W launched in June 1989, designed by Ryusuke Moriai as his first ever project for Casio. As of 2026, roughly 100 million units have been produced, making it the most sold watch in recorded history. That's not a marketing claim. That's a documented figure Casio has confirmed publicly on multiple occasions, and as of this year, it's also on the watch's Wikipedia page with a source attached. So why does it belong on a list of ignored watches? Because everyone ignores doesn't mean nobody buys it. It means nobody thinks about what it actually is. Barack Obama was photographed wearing one. So, unfortunately, we're members of Al-Qaeda. The Watches of Espionage website documented this in some detail. The F91W appeared in bomb-making facilities across Iraq and Afghanistan from as early as December 2001 during the Battle of Tora Bora. At Guantanamo Bay, analysts reportedly flagged ownership of the watch as a potential indicator of extremist training. Not because it's sophisticated, but because it's cheap, reliable, and available in Pakistani markets for around $4 a unit. They handed them out to recruits like stationery. That's not what Casio planned. But it confirms something true about this watch. It works. Everywhere. For everyone. Under any conditions. That's the spec that matters. The battery lasts 7 years. The alarm fires. The stopwatch runs to the second. The face is readable from 3 feet away in low light. The resin case is light enough that people regularly forget they're wearing it. A man in Chistopol, Russia, bought one in 1993, and it's still in his drawer. He knows because he still wears it on hiking days. What the F91W is, in the collector community, is a philosophical position. You wear it because you've decided to stop performing wealth through your wrist. A lot of people in tech figured this out a decade before anyone else did. The Silicon Valley wear the cheapest thing possible so nobody tries to sell you something. Aesthetic runs right through this watch. Bill Gates wore a Casio for years. Not this exact model, but the aesthetic is the same. Function as the point. Price as irrelevant. But here's the actual collector insight, the one that separates the people who know from the people who just buy it. The F91W is not the best Casio at $12. It's not even the best Casio at this price. It's the most famous Casio at this price. The A158 you just heard about arguably outperforms it on aesthetics. The reason it ranks above the A158 on this list is the 100 million unit story. That's not a spec, that's a cultural event. Most people know the F91W. Almost nobody knows why it holds up. The next watch nobody knows at all. Number 6, Casio MQ247B2. Stop for a second. This one's analog. Thin. The case is minimalist in the way that looks like it took a designer 4 years to arrive at. The dial is white, the hands are simple, and the whole thing reads like something that should have been on the cover of a 1972 watch catalog from Geneva. It costs $12. The MQ24 series is Casio's almost invisible analog line. No one talks about it in mainstream watch media. It never appears in best budget watch roundups because it's not dramatic enough to generate clicks. It has no world time, no module, no digital display, no backlight. What it has is 7 years of battery life on a single CR 2016 cell, a Japanese quartz movement, and proportions that make it look quietly expensive in a way the F91W never attempts. Here is the observation that makes this watch worth putting on a list. The people who design expensive watches spend an enormous amount of energy on restraint, on knowing what to leave out, on resisting the urge to add a complication, a date window, a texture to the dial, a second color to the hands, a chapter ring around the edge. The ones who get it right end up with something that looks inevitable, like there was never any other option. The Casio MQ24 arrives at the same place by accident, or by budget constraint, or by the fact that there was simply nothing left to add at $12. But the result is the same. The watch looks like a decision was made. A clean one. Picture the colleague who shows up to a client meeting wearing this. Nobody assumes it's $12. Nobody looks twice. It reads as intentional in a way that's almost embarrassing for every watch, costing 10 times more that achieved half the restraint. The collector community discovered this watch the way they discover most things. Casio doesn't bother to market. By accident? On a Watch You Seek thread titled something like, "Found this at a discount store and now I can't stop thinking about it." Forum members who own Rolexes have called the MQ247B2 in white and black the best sub-20 analog watch made by anyone, anywhere, in posts where they also mention their vintage date just. That's not hype from beginners. That's a considered judgment from people who know what they're comparing it to. There's a specific kind of satisfaction in wearing a watch that nobody can price by looking at it. You know what it cost. Nobody else does. That gap is a type of power that $5,000 watches pay a marketing department to create and don't always achieve. The MQ24 has it for free. Worth noting, Casio doesn't market this watch. They make it, put it on a peg, and let it sit there. The people who find it on their own. That's actually part of the appeal for the collectors who end up owning them. It can't be performed. You have to actually know. $12, twice. The next watch starts climbing in price, and what you get for the climb is worth understanding. Number 5. Citizen BM 8180. Picture someone who's been wearing the same beaten-up digital watch for 3 years, finally decides to buy something analog and respectable, sets a hard budget of $100, and walks into a watch store. He doesn't leave with this. He walks out with a Casio MTP, or a Timex Weekender, or a basic Seiko Quartz. The Citizen Solar watches are on the opposite wall, and nobody is pointing at them. The salesperson doesn't mention them because there's no margin story to tell. That's the Garrison's problem. Nobody makes the case for it. The BM 8180 runs on Citizen's EcoDrive Caliber, a solar-powered movement that charges from any light source, natural or artificial, and holds enough charge to run for 6 months in complete darkness. No battery to replace, ever. It's got 100 meters of water resistance, a 37mm case, which sounds small until you realize most people with normal-sized wrists are buying 42mm watches because that's what the industry pushes and not because that's what fits. Nylon strap in olive green that looks like something off a field watch costing 5 times more. The EcoDrive technology launched in 1976. Citizen has been refining it for nearly 50 years. The movement in the BM 8180 uses a thin-film amorphous silicon solar cell, the same underlying physics as commercial solar panels, compressed into a watch dial. This is not a gimmick or a novelty feature. It's a mature technology that Citizen has been perfecting since before most watch influencers were born. And the engineering behind it is legitimate enough that Citizen licensed a version of it to several other manufacturers over the years. It powers some watches that cost 10 times as much as the Garrison does. Think about what EcoDrive actually solves. The battery in a standard quartz watch lasts 2 to 3 years. You forget to replace it, the watch stops, you either take it somewhere or it sits in a drawer. The friction of maintenance is what kills most watches' daily use. Remove the friction, and the watch becomes permanent in a way nothing else at this price manages. A standard quartz and an EcoDrive quartz are not the same product. One needs occasional management, the other doesn't. That difference is undervalued in almost every conversation about affordable watches. What nobody says about this watch, the detail that actually matters. The 6-month power reserve in darkness is not designed for vaults. It's designed for your bag, because every person who owns a solar watch knows the experience of packing for a trip, forgetting to wear the watch for 2 weeks, and opening the bag to find it still running. The watches that drain in a few days in the dark are the ones that end up forgotten after their first long trip. This one doesn't do that. There's a project manager who's had this watch for 7 years. She bought it because she didn't want to think about batteries. She's never thought about the watch at all in 7 years. It's there when she needs it, and it's accurate when she checks it. She paid $95 in 2018, and it's still running on the charge it got from office lights last Tuesday. That's the point of this watch, right there. The BM 8180 was designed during an era when Citizen was building watches for outdoor use, not fashion positioning. They gave it 100 water resistance when competitors were putting 50 on comparably priced watches. They used a quartz movement rated to plus or minus 15 seconds per month, tighter than most mid-range mechanicals can match without regulation work. And they priced it around $100, where it sits quietly ignored between the fashion watches to its left and the dive watches to its right. Drop it below. If you had to choose, a watch that needs a battery every 2 years, or one that charges itself from the light above your desk right now? What's your actual answer? Solar power is underrated. The next watch doesn't need light. It needs your arm. Number 4. Orient Mako 2. Orient is one of the strangest stories in affordable watchmaking. They're owned by Seiko Epson, the same parent company as Seiko, and they build their own movements in-house at a price point that makes Swiss movement suppliers visibly uncomfortable when it comes up in conversation. The Mako 2 is 41.5 millimeters, 200 meters of water resistance, a unidirectional rotating bezel with a stainless steel inlay on certain variants, a signed crown. a date window with a rim around it, which is a small detail that most watches at this price forget entirely, and that you notice the absence of once someone points it out. But the part that matters is inside. The caliber F6922 running in the Mako 2 is Orient's own movement. Not a Miyota, not an ETA, not a clone of either. Their own design, built in their own facility, with manual winding and hacking on top of automatic winding. Features most competitors don't include at this price. The rated accuracy is -15 to +25 seconds per day, and most units in practice land closer to 5 to 10 seconds, which is competitive with Swiss automatics at 3 or 4 times the cost without regulation work. The forum consensus on the Mako 2 has been stable for years. In a 2021 Watch You Seek thread comparing affordable dive watches, multiple members who also owned SKX 007S wrote that the Mako 2's bracelet was better finished, the crown felt more considered, and the date display looked more refined. The SKX costs more in some configurations and carries the Seiko name, which is larger. The Mako costs less and is, on some objective measurements, more capable. Here's the detail that most Mako 2 reviews bury. The F6922 caliber Orient uses in this watch runs at 21,000 vibrations per hour, which is the same frequency as the Seiko 7S26 in the SNK 809. But Orient regulates their movements to tighter tolerances before shipping, which is why the out-of-the-box accuracy numbers on Mako 2s consistently outperform Seiko 5 equivalents in blind comparison posts on forums. The movements come from different companies with different internal standards, and Orient's standards for this specific caliber are stricter than Seiko's for the 7S26. That's not speculation. It's a pattern visible in years of hobbyist time-graphing data. So, here is the uncomfortable observation. Orient is an in-house movement manufacturer that prices its watches below what many ETA-equipped competitors charge for. Movements those competitors didn't even design themselves. The watch industry has an agreed-upon story about what things should cost and why, and which names justify which prices. The Orient Mako 2 doesn't follow that story. It builds its own movement, regulates it to a tighter spec than competitors at higher prices, charges less for the final product, and lets the watch make the argument. There's a man who bought a Mako 2 in 2019 as a placeholder, something to wear while he saved up for something serious. 4 years later, he owns a Tudor Black Bay and still reaches for the Orient on Saturdays. Not because the Tudor is too nice to wear, because the Mako is too good to retire. The person who buys a Mako 2 and wears it without explanation has figured something out. They're not paying for a name, they're paying for what's inside. In this hobby, that distinction is rarer than it sounds. In-house movement at $140. The next one charges twice that, and the reason is one of the best stories in American watch history. Number 3. Timex Marlin Automatic. The original Timex Marlin debuted in 1964. It was a dress watch for people who needed to look like they cared without spending money they didn't have. Office workers, teachers, young men in their first suit. The kind of people who bought a watch once and expected it to last until they handed it to someone. Timex brought it back in 2017, first as a faithful 34mm hand-wind reissue, and then in 2018 as the 40mm Marlin Automatic with a Miyota movement. It's the automatic version that earns its place here, and what it brought back is uncomfortably good-looking for what it costs. The reissue runs from 34 to 40mm, depending on the variant. The dial is restrained without being boring. Arabic numerals, clean hands, nothing fighting for attention. The stainless steel case is curved to sit against a wrist properly, rather than sitting flat on the skin like a disc, which is more engineering consideration than many automatics at 3 times this price bother with. Inside sits a Miyota 2-1 Jewel automatic movement, and this is where the Marlin earns its place near the top of the list. Miyota calibers, made by Citizen's Movement Division in Japan, power watches sold by brands at prices up to $2,000 and beyond. The same movement. The Marlin gets it for $170. The names on the dials of the more expensive watches are different. The beating heart underneath is not. The collector community split on this watch when it first reappeared. Half the forums thought Timex was cashing in on a legacy name with a movement strategy designed for lower margins. Then, the accuracy reports started coming in. The Miyota 8215's official spec is -20 to +40 seconds per day, which sounds loose until you understand that most units regulate closer to 10 to 15 seconds fast and settle down further with wrist time. Users on our watches in 2022 were posting time graphing results of single-digit deviation after a few weeks of regular wear. In a Timex, that barely got mentioned because people expected it to be worse and adjusted their expectations downward before they even put it on. It wasn't worse. It was good. And here's what the forums don't say. The thing that requires a bit of context to understand. Timex has been making watches since 1854. They survived the quartz crisis of the 70s by building inexpensive quartz watches when Swiss brands were shutting down or being absorbed. They survived the digital revolution, and then the smartwatch boom by not trying to compete with either one. They just kept making watches for people who needed a watch. The institutional knowledge in that heritage is not marketing copy. It's 170 years of knowing what a watch needs to do and doing it without charging you for the story. There's a retired school teacher in Ohio who has a 1967 Timex Marlin. It still runs. It belonged to her father, who wore it to parent-teacher conferences for 15 years. When Timex reissued the Marlin in 2017, she drove to the mall to look at one. She didn't buy it because she didn't need another Marlin, but she said the proportions were right. Said it felt like the same watch had come back. That's not a marketing story. That's what continuity of craft looks like. The Marlin Automatic is where that knowledge shows. Pick it up and it feels right in the hand in a way that's hard to put into words. Not impressive. Not trying to impress. Just right. That's the word for it. Right. Timex lasted over a century by getting the basics right. The next brand lasted through something harder than market shifts. Number 2, Vostok Amphibia. Approximately. In 1967, the Soviet Ministry of Defense needed a dive watch for naval frogmen. They went to the Chistopol watch factory, the same factory that had been producing military equipment since being evacuated from Moscow by horse cart in 1941, when German forces were 3 weeks from the city. More than 3,000 horse-drawn carts carried equipment through a frozen crossing of the Kama River to keep the factory alive. That is what the Amphibia is descended from. The engineers at Chistopol had a problem. They couldn't afford to replicate the case construction used by Swiss dive watches of the era. The tolerances required for a conventional screw-down crown with proper depth sealing were beyond what their available machinery could consistently achieve at volume. So they did something else. They engineered a case where external water pressure actively helps seal the watch, rather than threatening to breach it. The crystal is slightly flexible acrylic, and the caseback is bayonet style. The deeper you go, the more the water pressure pushes the seals inward, tightening the watch around itself. 200 meters of water resistance, achieved not by replicating Swiss engineering, but by solving the problem from a different direction entirely. Swiss watchmakers in 1967 called this approach crude. In one sense, they weren't wrong. The Amphibia's finishing is not fine. The movement can be inconsistent across units. The bracelet on some versions is the weakest part of the package. But the watch has been in continuous production for nearly 60 years. The pressure-sealed case principle still works at depth, and you can buy a new one today for under $100. The Chistopol factory became the official supplier of timepieces to the Soviet Ministry of Defense in 1965. The Amphibia went to space in 1975 aboard Soyuz 1-7 and to the Salyut 4 space station. It was driven over by trucks in quality testing and continued running. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991 and state contracts evaporated overnight, the factory adapted to private ownership and kept making amphibias. Because what else do you do when your main product has been validated by 60 years of Navy frogmen? The Amphibia today comes in a number of dial configurations, some tasteful, some spectacularly eccentric. The collector community has developed strong opinions about which hold up. The 110,909 inches dark blue is the model forum members consistently point to when someone asks which version to start with. That's the one. What makes the Vostok worth the number 2 spot on this list is not the price or the history, though both are striking. It's the engineering. The pressure-sealed case is an original solution to a real problem, not a copy of something Western brands developed first. There are maybe 24 truly original engineering ideas in affordable watchmaking. The Amphibia contributed one of them. Soviet engineering survived a collapsed empire and costs under $100. The last watch survived something harder, becoming the watch that started everything for most serious collectors alive. Number 1. Seiko SNK 809. Pull the collection histories of serious collectors. The ones with Grand Seikos and rotating storage, with vintage Patek on 3-year waiting lists, with pieces they don't mention casually. Ask what they started with. A disproportionate number of them will tell you something like this. A $70 watch. The SNK 809 is a 37mm field watch with a canvas strap from the factory. The 7S26 movement inside is Seiko's own. 21 jewels, automatic winding, no hacking, no manual wind. The accuracy runs roughly plus or minus 40 seconds per day, which sits on the looser side of what's acceptable for an automatic, but has never caused anyone who owns one to complain about missing a meeting. The power reserve is around 41 hours. This is not a perfect watch. Seiko doesn't pretend it is. The 7S26 movement has no hacking, which means you can't stop the second hand to set the time precisely. No manual winding either, so if it sits in a drawer for a few days, you'll need to wear it or shake it back to life. The accuracy on most units runs closer to plus or minus 20 seconds per day in practice. Better than the spec, but still nowhere near a basic quartz watch costing $8. None of that matters. But here's the reason it's number 1. The SNK 809 is the watch that taught an entire generation of collectors what automatic movement actually feels like on the wrist. Not mechanical watch, as a concept you've read about. The physical experience. The rotor in the 7S26 spins when your arm swings. You can feel it through the caseback if you press your thumb against the glass. The second hand doesn't tick once per second like a battery-powered quartz. It sweeps continuously, because the movement runs at 21,000 vibrations per hour, and the hand follows the rhythm without pausing. Nobody who puts a real automatic on their wrist for the first time and feels that sweep forgets it. The SNK 809 is where most serious collectors felt it first. The dial smells like the lacquer Seiko used in the 90s. The canvas strap comes stiff from the factory and breaks in over 3 weeks of daily wear, softening until it sits against the wrist as though it was cut for that wrist specifically. The numerals are painted in the modified Arabic style Seiko has used on field watches since the 1970s. Nothing on the dial fights for your attention. The whole watch is a single clear idea, and it doesn't apologize for being $70. The collector community's relationship with the SNK 809 is almost hard to articulate, because it's not really about the watch. It's about what the watch represents. People talk about their first car in the same register, the same mixture of affection and slightly embarrassed distance. The SNK 809 is the watch that made the hobby real for a lot of people, made it tactile, made it something you could own at 23 with a first salary and no real cushion. I know a collector who runs 3 vintage Rolexes and a Patek Aquanaut. He still wears the SNK 809 on weekends, not as a beater, not ironically, because it's the watch that made him understand what he was looking at, what the point of any of it was, and he doesn't want to lose that. There's a version of this list where the number 1 spot goes to something more obscure, something designed to show you the writer knows things you don't. But the honest answer to which cheap watch is the most overlooked goldmine in the hobby has to reckon with the SNK 809, because the number of people who own expensive watches and still point to $70 as where it started is not coincidence or sentiment. It's data. It's the most effective entry point in affordable horology, and most people walk straight past it. Which cheap watch surprised you? One you dismissed and then realized you'd been wrong about? Drop it below. Like this video and subscribe for more.